All right.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Wonderful. Okay, so we are live. The camera's on. I am a bit under the weather, and I don't know. My voice will probably be a bit lower, but it's more that like my brain is feeling a little bit foggy. So hopefully things make some sense. If they don't, stop me, and I will try to make sense, or someone else can make sense instead of me. Um, so this week is Parshas Chukas. So actually, for a long time, I thought those the name pasuk that you insert in Shemona Esrei. So for a long time, in the Siddurim and stuff, there's a list of everyone's names, and I remember in second grade, we had to go home and ask our parents to help us find them, our pasuk. And in the list of names, there was never any pasuk there wasn't a pasuk for my name. My name is Zisal, starts with a Zayin, ends with a Lamed, and I couldn't find a pasuk for my name. And we even looked in another book and they didn't have it. I remember we went on a little exploration. So for a few years, I thought, oh, maybe they just don't have one that starts with Zayin and ends with Lamed. And then the new edition of the Siddur came out, and they had a expanded version of the names, and I found my pasuk, and it's actually this pasuk of Zeis Chukas. So I know that in this pasuk, if it's my name, that means that it represents something for me, a special message for me. So when this parsha comes up, it's an opportunity to delve into something that I know has some sort of connection to my personal avodah. So for that reason, he can't find it. there's maybe the Zion. Maybe there's not so many Zion psukim. Yeah, there must be somewhere out there, right? But so an exploration maybe of this idea a little bit of Zeis Chukas. These are the chukim, which are technically defined as statutes, which is one of those words that's useless because no one really knows what statutes mean, so it doesn't even help. But so it's a word that has more significance, I guess, in Hebrew than in English too. So this parsha is opening up with a discussion of the Para Aduma. The Para Aduma was the red calf that was burnt, or cow. It was, couldn't have any dark hairs on it or any other color hairs on it, and then they would basically bring this cow as a korban, and they would burn it, and the ashes were used to purify people who were specifically tamei mace. And in general, so this whole concept is known as the ultimate chayt, the ultimate mitzvah that doesn't really have reason or understanding. So let's step back for a second. Even before we get to the Para Aduma, in general, the concept of Tuma and Tara is a chayt, the concept of purity and impurity. It's not something that you could physically see, that something is clean or dirty, right? Thinking of purity and impurity as clean and dirty, that's wrong. That's not what it is. It's not about being clean and dirty. There is some sort of weird spiritual phenomenon that happens when certain things touch certain things, and the fact how it's transmitted, different tumas are transmitted in different ways, through touching. Some tumas pass through touching, some pass through sitting over under the same tent. That's tumas el, if you're in the same house. So there's different ways of transmission, different forms of tuma. So the laws of Tuma and Tara are extremely, extremely complex. And during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, it was extremely important that you got them right, because you were impacting the people around you, right? The Tuma, back in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when people went, so first of all, if you've ever been in Israel, around Yerushalayim, and specifically around the old city of Yerushalayim, there's tons of mikvahs, right? That's just all around the old city. There's a whole bunch of mikvahs, because basically anyone who came into the old city into where like the Beis Hamikdash was would travel in the mikvah, because you don't even know, like, what were you exposed to certain impurities, were you not? Maybe the person who was tamei didn't tell you, and they, right? So like, it's a very, very, very complex set of laws. It was probably the most complex set of laws, of halachic laws that there are. And to us, they're totally, basically, except for the tuma of nida, it's not applicable to us today. And even nida is not applicable to us as it was during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, because then tumas nida was, you couldn't, it wasn't something that was necessarily secret, because you had to share it, because if someone's going to the Beis Hamikdash, they have to deal with that tumah, right? So tumah and tara was a part of everyday life. We still have a slight element of tumah and tara left in our world, and obviously before Mashiach comes, we will all have to go through like a big purification process. But that's what the role of this paraduma was. And like I said, so to begin with, tumah and tara, right? For all the people, when they give you, beautiful explanations for taras mishpacha, they're nice explanations, but they're not actually reasons, because tumah and tara is a chayk. It doesn't have an actual reason. So it might be something that, helps inspire you to fulfill the mitzvah, but it's not actually a reason for the mitzvah. And because when it comes to chukim, it's explained that it's not only that we don't understand it. It's not that we're not smart enough, right? There are certain things that are complicated for us to understand. There are certain subjects that are hard to understand because they're extremely complex and deep and lofty, right? So probably if I came in here and started talking, some like very like deep philosophy, I would probably lose some people, because they're hard to understand, certain subjects, right? Complex mathematics, hard to understand. A chayk is not something that's hard to understand. It's something that has no reason. So it's different than hard to understand, right? Different than hard to understand if it has no reason. No, so that's the point over here.
Wasn't my shit taught it though?
Okay, so this is a question that I've had all the time, and I actually saw a footnote this year that finally have some clarity on that. So I'm going to get to it in a minute, okay? So to just, before we even go there to that idea. So in general, mitzvahs are divided into three categories, right? We have mishpatim, which are things that are very rational and understandable. Things like honor your father and your mother. That's rational, understandable. We understand. Our parents give things to us. Our parents sacrifice for us. So we honor them in sort of repayment. Don't kill. Don't steal. These are things that they fit into our moral understanding of the world. And so they make a lot of sense to us. And there's a lot of these things that a lot of people in the world do, even though God didn't command them to do it, because they're rational, normal things, understanding, right? Then we have edus. Edus are things that commemorate a certain thing that happened to the Jewish people or with Hashem. So, matzah, exactly. The Yamim Tovim are mostly edus. There's certain mitzvahs that are, commemorating certain events. And then we have chukim, right? So all mitzvahs in general, all mitzvahs come from Hashem's ratzon. Ratzon means will. Will is higher, it's sourced in a deeper space than intellect. It's a higher level than intellect. If you look at yourself, right, within yourself, what's like the core that drives everything that we do, consciously or subconsciously? That's why we're saying it's deeper than intellect, because lots of times it's driving us and we don't even realize that it's driving us. We're not even realizing why we're doing what we're doing or why we're pursuing what we're pursuing, because it's coming from will, which is a deeper level than understanding, right? So like we have, let's say, a drive, some of like the very basic wills that people, or drives, ratzon, that people have. And these are some like the deeper ones, and we can get to more external ones. People have extremely strong ratzon for acceptance and to be like understood, right? People have a very strong ratzon to be loved. We have a ratzon to have a home, have a place where we can settle, to call our own, right? Like these are like deep drives that drive us to do all the things that we're doing. And they don't necessarily make sense. Like, they're not things that we like think about or analyze. They're like at the core of, they're almost like part of our identity of who we are. They form who we are, is our drives. And then we can take our drives and we can explain them. Once you can sometimes take certain drives and explain them to somebody else, right? So I think like probably the best context to put these three categories in to like understand them a bit is, I think, in, let's say, our relationship. A marriage relationship is just it's a good space to look at that. So we're going to use that for today. In a marriage is built off of, or any relationship between two people, it's built off of people giving to each other, right? And doing things for each other. Now, there are certain things that everyone in every relationship, if it's going to last, they are going to do, right? There's certain things that are just like basic parts of a relationship. And in different relationship dynamics, they can play out in different ways. Somebody's got to take out the garbage and somebody's going to do the dishes, and somebody's, right, like we're going to find like our division of labor where we feel comfortable and we feel like we're respecting each other, right? That's going to work its way into a marriage. And then there's also like the basic things that you're going to find in just like the basic expressions of love and commitment that you're going to find in every marriage, right? And that's what we might call the mishpatim, right? The things that just like make sense. Of course you do it. And if that's not happening, something might be wrong, right? Like then that would set off the red flags right away, right? Then there's edus, which are things that are like specific to our relationship, commemorative of our relationship, right? So you can have, just in general, these are, again, more general, everyone has them, but like there's regular anniversaries, right? Then there are like special anniversaries that the two of you have together of like something you did one day, once upon a time, and you like to, it's like important to like bring these elements into the relationship to commemorate every year. Oh, right, we had this fantastic time, whatever, and it was like so like important in our relationship, and we commemorate that element of our relationship. It's special to our relationship, but it also makes sense, right? And then there are the things in each individual marriage, and this is really where I think a lot of the work in a relationship comes into play, are the things about the other person that don't make sense, and you have to live with them and do what you can to deal with them anyway, right? It's like my father would say, putting up with the other person's mishigas, but like that's really where the relationship gets strengthened, and in those things that, let's say, a partner, you can see it a lot of times in like when someone's suffering with, let's say, something like depression, which is like so hard to deal with, and it's not making any sense. Like, why aren't you happy? Like, why can I do something to make you happy? And it's like, and the other person's not happy, and I have to find a way to work through this relationship with that depression, or with that anxiety, or with just like the thing that drives the other person crazy, even though it makes no sense that it drives you crazy, or the things that drive me crazy, even though they make no sense, right? And we have to express those things somehow, and we have to work with those things in the other person, and we have to give to the other person, even in the things that make literally no sense to us, right? Like that's just what being in a relationship with somebody else is. And like we said, in those things, that's really like the hardest. It's the hardest to do. But it also really, like, that shows the depth of the relationship. And if you're not committed to the relationship, that's where you cut it off, right? When it starts like, oh, they're demanding things of me that don't make sense, right? That's like where you would say bye. But when it's a committed relationship and you're really like accepting the whole entire person, obviously within the range of protecting yourself and being healthy, and it's, as long as it's not, abusive or something like that, but within the, a certain realm of, there's a certain range of like normalcy, where that's where we have to like give up on ourselves and accept the other person, right? And so that's, I think we could kind of say, like, represents it in our relationship with God. We have the things that make sense, the things we do to commemorate, and then there's Hashem has some mishigas. He has some need that we don't understand, and he tells us to do it. And it can be extremely difficult on the other end to have to do it because it doesn't make sense, right? And again, the reason it doesn't make sense, all of these things actually start in will, right? All the mitzvahs start in will, which is higher than intellect. But some of them come from a more external part of will that can be verbalized. It can be expressed. When something is, less like deep, you can eventually, hopefully, try to express the reason for the need with the other person. Like, I need you to compliment me because I have an insecurity. So I need you to compliment me because I feel insecure about this, that, and the other. So please compliment me about these things, right? I can express that need, and it can even make sense, right? And I can understand it. But then when you get to like super, super deep things, it becomes, I wouldn't even say harder to express, but it's almost impossible to express. There are things that are beyond expression, right? And that's what we mean when we say it's a hike. There is no reason. God has this desire and there is no reason. And it's not just that we don't understand the reason. There is no reason. There's also different levels of chukim. So there are certain chukim that it says maybe, one day we can understand the reason. But the absolute chukim, which paraduma is an example of that, it says, okay? So to explain this idea, Shlomo Melech didn't know the reason of paraduma. That's given as like how intense it is. Shlomo Melech didn't know the reason. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, the reason was revealed to him. Okay? So let's break this up for a second. Shlomo Melech, what is he known to be? The smartest. He is the smartest. That means his intellect is the biggest. He knows everything. So if the reason is intellectual, then Shlomo Melech knows it. But because chayk, it's not an intellectual reason. There's no intellectual reason. Therefore, Shlomo Melech knows it. Then we go to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why it says that Moshe Rabbeinu knew the reason, but didn't we just say there's no reason? That makes no sense, right? So how could it be that Moshe knows the reason if there is no reason? So as opposed to Shlomo, who's known as the wisest man, Moshe is known to be completely and totally humble, right? That is what he is known to be. He's known to be humble. That means that he completely and totally lets go of himself. He has this utter, total bittul. So when we say he knows the reason, it's not that he knows the reason intellectually. It's that he's able to experience the ratzon. That's what it means that he knows the reason. So he's able to experience the will as Hashem is experiencing it, because he totally lets go of his own will and his own everything, and therefore becomes just like utterly synchronized with God. So when you're utterly synchronized, it's not like, we need to have it's not that, Hashem explains it to him with conversation, with words. It's that almost like he embodies the reason, right? And he knows the reason from that place of ratzon, not from that place of intellect. Because on the level of intellect, there is no reason. Make sense? Yes? No? Okay. So that's the idea of the chayk, that there is no reason. Moshe Rabbeinu somehow knows the reason. And it's also pushes us, the idea of a chayk is that it pushes us to really get to the core, to like, it challenges the parameters of the relationship, right? How far does this relationship go? How far are we willing to push for Hashem, right? And excuse me. So that is this idea of the chukim, and it really forces us to tap into a very deep place within ourselves to be able to serve Hashem from this level. So let's talk a little bit about what is so strange about specifically the paraduma. Like what is so hard to understand about the paraduma? So really, and this is the thing that like comes out, the most striking element of the paraduma is that when in the paraduma process, again, there's a lot of details that just seem so like the whole idea, why does the cow have to be like totally red? It just doesn't make sense, right? But the strangest, in this point, there's one point of it that doesn't just not have a reason, it seems to contradict reason, right? It's something that like actually seems like the opposite of reason. And that is that when the person sprinkled the ashes, the kohen that sprinkled the ashes onto somebody else, what happened to him? He became tummy, and the other person became tahar. And it's strange for a number of reasons. First of all, the way Tumas Mace passes is not through the act of, generally, it's not through the act of sprinkling on somebody else. And why is this happening? Like, it's a purification process. Why is the person becoming tamei? And I will not tell you the answer because it doesn't make sense. There is no reason, right? It's something that's just totally illogical. That's the word I've been looking for the whole time. Just totally illogical. The fact that it, like we said, it's like mitame es ha tahirin umitaharis es hatmei. That's what happens in the acts of this sprinkling. So, so to tie this into some of the other things that we've been talking about until now. So it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu heard about the fact that there is going to be this concept of tamei mace, he actually became worried. Like, he became concerned. There's this concept of tamei mace, and he became worried, and he said, how are we going to fix this? Why is tamei mace something that's like so difficult in Moshe's mind to reverse? So in general, what is the concept of death? Like, when is something dead? What happens?
The soul leaves the body.
Right, the soul leaves,
And
the life force, right? Like that, the life energy leaves the person. And what do we know life is? Where does life come from? God, right? So when something dies, or someone dies, right, the godliness that was in them is no longer there, right? They're still living on in, maybe, the neshama lives on in another realm of reality, right? But in our physical world, all of a sudden, there is a void of godliness. And this is probably the most intense void of godliness you can get. Because even when we say, let's say, what are other examples of places of sometimes, things that need rectification? When do things need to be fixed? Things need to be fixed because we say no to God, right? Hashem tells us to do something, and we say no, we don't listen to him, right? So we need to fix that. When you say no to Hashem, Hashem is still there. I'm just denying him, right? And in a way, you could say Hashem is almost there. There's a certain strength of presence of somebody when you say no to them, right? When you feel them so strongly that like their will is like counteracting my will, there's almost a certain like really strong experience of God that I have in that act of saying no. So even when I'm saying no, Hashem is still there. I'm just turning him away. I'm pushing him away. But Hashem is still there, right? So the rectification for that would be some sort of, working on myself, doing tshuva on myself to reconnect with Hashem, working through, different methods of tshuva to reconnect myself to God, to understand why I want to be connected to God, right? But in this case of death and the tumah that comes from death, and it's not anyone's fault, right? It's not like, it's Hashem who's deciding this, and like we said before, it's Hashem's chayk that he said that we have to do this. But we're totally cutting off. Within natural order, we have a cutoff from Hashem, right? In this world, there's a cutoff from Hashem. And that's such an intense tumah, right? That's why it's called the father, the avia tumas is tumas nes. What is tumah? What like we said before, it's some sort of like spiritual thing, right? It's not something like that you could see. It's not physical dirty, but like there's like this intense, you could say, energy of lack of godliness here. There's this intense energy of like a void in the case of tamei mace. And so Moshe Rabbeinu, when he hears about tamei mace, he's like, how do we fix this? Within natural order, there's no way to counteract this, because within natural order, there's no God here, right? It's like this massive void. How are we supposed to fix this? And so that's when Hashem explains to him about paraduma, this thing that makes literally no sense to us. He says, to fix the tamei mace, to fix this intense void of godliness, we must go outside of the world. We must go outside of nature. We have to go outside. We have to transcend logic, understanding. We have to transcend everything that we know to be true. We have to transcend all the elements of that are like within our understanding to fix this, because there is no fix for death in our minds. Even in 2022, we still have not been able to find a way to fix death yet, right? They're working on downloading the consciousness, right? So that would be like some, but it's not actually, that's not even fixing death, right? Like we can't bring someone back to life. There's no natural way to do that. So to fix death, we need to go outside of nature completely, outside of order completely. And that's the idea of the para aduma. It's this idea of something that literally makes no sense. And not only that, but it's not only that it doesn't make sense, it makes no sense for the person who's doing it to do the process, right? The person who's actually coming and purifying the other person, selfishly, why should they want to go there, right? Why should they want to deal with becoming tummy mace themselves? There's no reason. They're not gaining anything from this. And especially back then, you had to stay outside the camp. That's not comfortable. And especially in the desert, to be outside the camp, it's very uncomfortable. And it's difficult. You're away from your family. You're away from your, I think also, to take it to an even deeper level. So who were the people who were doing this? Were the Kehanim. And the Kehanim had very, very, very short shifts, right? Where they actually got to work in the Beis HaMikdash. So imagine your short shift. You have, I think, 1 week a year, or is it 2 weeks? It's 1 week a year, and you have, I think, from that week, 1 day that you're actually doing the Avodah. So it's your day, and guess what? You get to go make yourself Tamei Mace outside the camp, purifying another Jew. So you're not even getting to go into the Beis HaMikdash, do the Avodah. It was like a big deal. That's what they hyped themselves up for the whole year, and that's what they stayed pure for the whole time. They stayed pure so that they could be able to go into the Beis HaMikdash. And now, what's my job? I got to make myself impure to make somebody else pure.
Can one coin be entirely more than one person, or is it one ton and made to one coin? Because that's a lot of running.
I don't know. I can't imagine. I think it's probably one person to one person because you sprinkle them and then your tummy, so you can't do it. I don't think you could do like a mass sprinkling. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Like a family and those
right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. But
no, but that would be one cup, but then the kind would also be purified after.
No, because you have to wait.
How long do you have to wait?
I believe it's 7 days for tummy mace.
Or
I don't know exactly.
Outside the camp, I thought they just have to go to the mikvah and wait until nightfall.
I don't know the exact amount of time because I am not so familiar with the halachas of that type of tumas. So different tumas, you have either one night or there's a week for certain tumas. I don't know. It could be just that night. It could be just that night, but still he lost his day.
It's night and then mikvah.
Right. But he lost his day in the Beis HaMikdash still, right? So it's like this it's the sacrifice of his like ultimate job, right? And so it's just like absolute, from the perspective of the Kohen, it's this absolute sacrifice of himself that he's doing this for the other person, right? And he's totally sacrificing. Again, like this was something that they looked forward to the whole year. It's like this is why you're elevated, and this is why you're special, and you're getting this opportunity, and it's losing it. So there's this. And the point of that is that in order to fix something that is totally out of natural order, it's not that another person can fix it. The other person can't fix it because we see that person, there are certain times when it's very obvious that you're channeling something bigger than yourself, right? There are certain times where you could think, oh, I have the power to purify, to whatever, right? But how do we know that it's obvious that you're channeling something bigger is when there's like this absolute bittul of yourself. When you're able to totally let go of yourself, that's when it becomes obvious that you're channeling something bigger than yourself, right? And so the Kohen in this case is totally letting go of himself and channeling something bigger than himself. He has to have this complete bittul of all of his own desires and wants, and he's able to then purify something that shouldn't be able to be purified, right? Also, we know something else interesting just in general about the para aduma is that where does it take place is michutz hamachna, outside the camp. Even like the whole process of creating the para aduma also happens outside the camp. It's the only sort of carbon that exists that happens outside of the Beis Hamikdash, not in the Beis Hamikdash, but specifically outside the Beis Hamikdash. And the point is that it's there to purify those things. The Beis Hamikdash purifies within natural order. The Beis Hamikdash helps us rectify regular tshuva, helps us rectify all those things that are normal and within natural order. To fix those things that are outside of natural order, we have to go outside the camp. That's sort of where you can say, like, the things that are super bad live. The boogeyman is outside the camp, right? The things that are bigger than just like the regular normal bad things that we do, that's what we find outside the camp. We have to go outside the camp. We have to sort of go into that source, go into that space to redraw and draw out the good things that are there, right? So to bring this just to, obviously, right now we are not dealing with the Parah Aduma. Mirz Hashem, very soon we should all be sprinkled with the ashes. Actually, the ashes, we'll get to that in a minute. But
it can't be that one person per person because we're all covered.
Yeah.
It has to be one person.
Maybe they'll get like a sprinkler system. Sort of, like those like, yeah, exactly. So actually something else, this is just an interesting discussion. And we're not going to get into it, but when I was looking through different things about this concept, there's actually a whole discussion. A mace makes somebody else tummy, but the mace itself doesn't become tummy.
Yes, tummy.
No, the mace himself, as in, if he came back to life, there's actually a halachic debate. Do they actually need purification? Because it says the mace is mitame, which means that it makes tame, something else that touches it. But does it inherently become tame? And the example that's brought is, did the Isha Shunamis, did her son require to be purified when he came back alive? Because he actually died. And that also goes into a discussion when Mashiach comes. Will everyone who comes up from the dead actually need to be purified? They may not need to be. There's different
they got this. You said they got this. They become like as if detaching from Hashem.
Right. Right, but it's like a halachic discussion of whether
it's one cow.
There's enough for all the people. But so to bring that idea into ourselves. So so there's, in general, what does this Veda represent? Being that right now we are not actively involved in the Parah Aduma. So it's not something that's relevant to us right now. But in general, this represents the Avodah of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh, what is Mesiras Nefesh? Mesiras Nefesh is doing something. The first case of Mesiras Nefesh that's brought in Tanakh, and it's known as, it's like the thing that gave us all, imbued us all with the energy to be Mesiras Nefesh, was Yitzchak at the Akedah, Avram bringing Yitzchak. Avram bringing Yitzchak on so many levels that just didn't make sense. It was total opposite of what we know. First of all, what Jewish practice was like. Hashem also told Avram, "I'm going to build a nation from this son," and then he's telling him to bring the son as a korban. It made no sense, right? And Avram did it anyway. That is the action of Mesiras Nefesh, and it actually ties into Yud Beis Tammuz, which is next week. The Rebbe, whenever he spoke about Yud Beis Tammuz and the day of Yud Beis Tammuz, which is when the Friedrich Rebbe was released from jail, right after he was incarcerated for religious activities in the USSR, and it was a very strong case against him. He was involved in many illegal activities, and the Russians were not shy about hurting and killing and exiling the people that they imprisoned. And the Friedrich Rebbe, he continued his activities even in the face of the danger, and he didn't just continue. He really, really, really pushed his Chassidim, and they all acted with this absolute Mesiras Nefesh, and continued to act with absolute Mesiras Nefesh even after his even after he left. But that this idea of Mesiras Nefesh, which today most of us, Baruch Hashem, don't need to give up our lives for Judaism in this way. Our Mesiras Nefesh is not such an obvious, like, convert or die type of situation. But, there are so many times where there are elements in Judaism that either negate our experience, or especially in a world that is telling us very strongly to, like, listen to yourself and what's your gut telling you, and to take your direction in life and living your best life, right? Those are, like, I think a lot of, like, the messages that are in the world. And the Torah tells us something maybe a little bit different, right? And sometimes there are elements of the Torah where I do not feel like by doing them I am living my best life, or I am actualizing my identity, right? I don't feel that way, and it's going against what my intellect says, right? Like, that's why I said, like, I feel like for me that's where my Avaita is. And I think that's why it's my pasuk connected to my name, is that I'm okay with, following the rules as long as they make sense in my mind, right? It's nice Chukas, right? So that's about the chukim, right? So it doesn't make sense. So it's easy to follow rules that make sense. I mean, some people have a hard time following rules even if they make sense. But for me personally, it's easy to follow rules that make sense. If it maintains order and structure, et cetera, et cetera. But, like, once they stop making sense, it's a lot harder to follow them. It's a lot harder to feel connected to them. It's a lot harder to push yourself in them. It's a lot harder to pass them on to your children, right? All these different things. It's much, much more difficult when it doesn't make sense. And that's where, again, like we said before, that's where the parameters of our relationship are tested and pushed, like the boundaries are pushed. And it's so important, right? Like, for us to recognize that, like, I do something sometimes even though it doesn't make sense. For my spouse, I do something even though it makes no sense. For me, for my child, I do something. For my parent, for all people who are close to me, for people I love, I give of myself even when it doesn't make sense. And with God, I give of myself even when it doesn't make sense. And when I'm doing that, that means that I am tapping into the core of our oneness, right? When I'm giving to my spouse in a way that doesn't make sense to me, and I let go of my own reason and logic, what it allows me to do is to tap into the core of our oneness. I know this is meaningful to you, so I am doing it for you. And on a certain level, if I really let go, I can almost begin to understand their desire in the way that Moshe understood what paraduma is, which means not in a rational way, but in an empathy way, right? Where I can feel your need, not because it makes sense to me, but because I become so one, I let go of myself and I enter into your space. And I really am able to do this thing for you without understanding it, right? And that's what happens to us when we go to this Mesiras Nefesh space. And the reason we're able to go to this Mesiras Nefesh space is because ultimately I also know the reason, right? There's the not just that, excuse me. We get our yechida, which is supplied, which is fed, nourished by Moshe Rabbeinu, ultimately, and Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation, right? It feeds the core of my soul. And at that core of my soul, I know the reason, not in an intellectual way, but in a way of knowing that this is what Hashem wants for me. And I go into that depth of space when I say that I'm doing this. When I'm doing it because it makes sense, then I'm also doing it for me. But when I'm doing it when it doesn't make sense, that's just doing it for you. That's how we're able to do something just for somebody else, is when it doesn't make sense to us, right? Because when it makes sense to us, it's like, yeah, I want this also, right? And it works for me also. But when I let go, that's when it shows that I'm really doing it for the other person, and I'm really doing it for God. And that's like this act of Mesiras Nefesh, which really uncovers the deepest part of our soul. And the Rebbe brings a few different practical hirais about this idea. And he says, the first thing is that when sometimes we encounter in other people, they seem so lost, they seem so cut off, it almost seems like they're dead in a Jewish way, right? It almost seems like they're dead in a Jewish way. Guess what? There's a rectification for death. There's a way to fix even death, And how does that happen? Through me channeling something that's bigger than myself. When I totally am bottled to that, to what I need to do to like work with that person and help expose them to Judaism, that I can do it. Like, don't think that death is the end when it comes to spirituality. And I think for a lot of us, even if you're not like actively involved with working with other people, I think there are elements in ourselves where we feel like, okay, that part of me is spiritually dead. Like, that's something I'm never gonna be able to feel connected to that. And the point is, you don't give up on that dead element in yourself. There is a cure for death. The paradigm is a cure for death. It's difficult. It's the hardest of items, but there is that cure. That Mesiras Nefesh is that cure, even for those things that seem totally out of reach. That's the first. The second is that the very practical Haira, and this was something that the Rebbe got asked all the time. How are you sending people on shlichus? What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to their children? They're being exposed to all, because many from communities are very insular, and cutting ourselves off from outside exposure. We don't want to be exposed. We're scared of being exposed, like that constant fear of not exposing yourself to other cultures, because you might get if you wrestle with a dirty person, you will get dirty too, right? So why go and engage with someone who is tamei? Why go there? And the Rebbe gives this answer over here. He says, if you are batel, you might get a temporary impurity. It's true, right? Your kids will be exposed to more things than the kid who has no exposures. They will be. It's a fact, right? That's what happens. In the process of helping someone else, I might become a little dirty. But that's what we do for other people. That's what we do to help another Jew. That's the bittul that's necessary in Avos Yisrael, and the bittul that's necessary in general in our Avodas Hashem, to let go, to help somebody else, to let go of myself. And at the end of the day, I can then also be purified, right? But I do have to go there. I do need to it's okay to let yourself get a little dirty to help somebody else, which, it's, I think, a very important lesson. But this is Haira number 3, is that where does the power for all this come from? Who creates the paraduma? Moshe Rabbeinu. We need to make sure we're anchored to something higher than ourselves before we go there. Because if you just go there feeling like it's your own power, it's not going to work. Then you will get dirty, and it might not be like so easy to clean off. Moshe Rabbeinu, actually, from his paraduma, the first paraduma that he made, it was split into 3. One portion was used for all the people who became tamei meis during the duration of that para. The second was actually used to purify the kahanim who were going to make the future paraduma. So all of the paradumas, there were 9 so far, and then there will be a 10th when Mashiach comes. So all of the paradumas after Moshe Rabbeinu, all 9 of them, before the person who was actually preparing the paraduma was purified with the paraduma of Moshe Rabbeinu. So to connect it all to that first one, to connect it to Moshe Rabbeinu. And then the third part was put aside, last third, it says l'mishmeres, just to have. And this is such a powerful point that the Rebbe says, is that even though we do go and give everything from ourselves to help somebody else, you need to make sure to remember to save some resources for yourself. Just in case you need them, right? Because you're also, again, you're potentially going to get dirty. But like, even when you're giving of yourself, and you're giving of yourself so fully in the moment, right? We need to make sure to have a supply of resources, l'mishmeres. Something you need to have, you need to have your backup plan. You need to have the places where you go to for your inspiration. You need to have a plan for yourself. You can't just forget about yourself, because the only way you can truly inspire somebody else is through being an inspired person yourself, and through being a fed and purified person yourself. So you make sure, even when you're preparing and like we said, you're going with this utter Mesiras Nefesh, you're going with this bittul, you make sure to always have a reserve of some resources for yourself. And I think there are just so many points from this that are extremely relevant on the level of paraduma and even removing it away from the level of paraduma, and Eretz Hashem, we should all be sprinkled with the ashes very soon.
Amazing.
It's not necessarily the most appealing part of the Mashiach process, but it will.
It's just a little ash.
Yeah, it's just a little ash, exactly.
It's actually, you see on your car already, but there's stuff falling, so it's somehow, so.
Especially when it's wildfire season.
Yeah.